Hello and welcome to Armenian News Network Groong, Week in Review for October 25, 2020. This week, we'll continue to talk about the ongoing war in Artsakh. We're going to consider the following major aspects: international diplomacy on the move, what is Turkey's endgame, war and post-war economy, and we'll do an update on COVID. To talk about these issues, we have with us Asbet Kochikian, a senior lecturer of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts, 𝐀𝐬𝐻N𝐞𝐝 𝐊𝐴𝐻𝐿, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. And Emil Sanamyan, a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan. Before we begin, we'd appreciate your help in reaching a wider audience, so please don't forget to subscribe and like us on whatever platform you listen to us on, and help spread the word by sharing this podcast on your social media channels. Thanks in advance. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Hello.
Hello.
Let's start by looking at some international diplomacy that's going on around the war. On Friday, the foreign ministers of both Armenia and Azerbaijan were in Washington, D.C., both meeting Pompeo separately. Right before this trip, both FMs made a short trip to Moscow for consultations with Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov. The US has been all but disengaged from the Caucasus over the past few years. So, Emil, I wanted to know, what can we attribute the recent US activity to?
Well, I had very modest expectations, and so far they're sort of being confirmed. As you know, as the meeting between Armenian Foreign Minister and the Secretary of State was about to start, Azerbaijan launched one of the heaviest bombardments of Stepanakert, literally like minutes before the meeting began. So just to show that, this is a sideshow and this is not really decisive, in any way as far as what's going on the ground. So we've saw these reports of meetings, and my understanding is actually the foreign minister stayed here for an extra day to do some more meetings in Congress. The value of this could be some kind of congressional action, some kind of emergency assistance to Armenia, some kind of sanctions against Azerbaijani and Turkish officials. Unless that is produced, this will be just part of a kind of a marginal diplomatic effort. We obviously see the political context to this. The elections is just 10 days away now, less than that actually, almost a week from now. And of course, there is some sensitivity on the part of the administration to show that they're doing something. So I think this call to invite foreign ministers that was earlier in the week, I think was related to the elections, just to show that they are involved in some way. But beyond that, unless there is, like I said, some kind of unilateral U.S. action in terms of assistance, in terms of sanctions, this is it.
Asbet, maybe then you can follow up on where do we go from here in the international diplomacy?
Apparently, from everything, I don't think it's the road to nowhere. The international diplomacy, especially when it comes to the U.S. Involvement, as Emil rightfully mentioned, it is a dead end and disengagement, as also Hovik that you mentioned, and the fact that signs and sort of. Events that happen in terms of don't happen out of nowhere. The fact that both foreign ministers went through Moscow, the road to DC goes through Moscow. That is in itself telling us something. I think the U.S., other than the mild statements that it's made within the context of the OSCE and so on, is completely and utterly uninterested in this conflict in terms of the upcoming elections. So the ball, I think, is regional, as I have argued elsewhere, and I have argued before. The diplomatic solution has to be regional, or will be regional, not has to be. And when I say that, I mean Russia and Turkey.
But not Iran?
Not necessarily. I mean, the problem with Iran is that Iran has always been informed and has always been on top of issues, but there is a major problem about Iran being involved in any process, regional process from the United States. So while understanding this, I've always, when I've studied Iranian-Russian relations or even Turkish-Iranian relations, I've always seen that both countries, Russia and Turkey, have always been trying to include Iran in various processes, not actively, but without actually antagonizing the US, because that's a red line, quote unquote, if you want to call it a diplomatic red line, that the US would not accept. But I think Iran behind the scenes exerts a lot of pressure or has a gravitas, has a presence, whether you like it or not, be that militarily or be that statements. And also, I have to mention that Iran's foreign policy has always been like the Iranian foreign policy for decades, many decades. It's not characterized with overt statements, rather behind the scene diplomacy and sort of reading in between the line statements.
Okay, let's go back to Moscow. And Emil, I wanted to ask you then, a few days before the Washington trip, Putin had a speech at, I think, at the Valdai summit, if I'm not mistaken. And during that speech, he brought up the 𝐀𝐬𝐛𝐞𝐝 massacres. And obviously the Armenian genocide, though he didn't call it as such. But, he brought up the 𝐀𝐬𝐛𝐞𝐝 massacres and mentioning that as the root of the conflict lies in the criminal treatment of Armenians in Azerbaijan. How does this fit, if at all, into the larger diplomatic initiative or diplomatic worldview of Russia?
Well, overall context of those remarks, that wasn't a top topic that came up during that discussion, and the reason it came up, I think, it was an online Valdai forum, so we had a couple of experts who regularly participate in this. I think it was Fyodor Lukyanov and maybe also Anatol Levin who raised this issue. So, Putin didn't come up talking about it by himself. He was asked about it, and of course he was ready to answer that. Generally, the response made it clear that, again, there won't be any direct military involvement by Russia, but they are taking steps but while they're sympathetic to the Armenians in general, they're not going to be militarily involved directly, but they're taking steps on the ground that we've seen. In terms of deploying Russian forces into Syunik, into areas near Goris and Kapan and Mehri. I mean, they are based in Mehri regularly as well as border guards, but it looks like the regular army has been moved from Gyumri base towards that southern border of Armenia. So they are kind of continuing to implement their security obligations to a Republic of Armenia, but not directly involved in fighting in Karabakh or trying to really impact either the international terrorism kind of wing of this fight, which is the Turkish-Syrian mercenaries that have, the Russian government has confirmed that they believe they're there, or to negate Turkish participation in the fighting.
So Turkey is a big variable now, it seems. And we've been hearing a lot of rumors and, some confirmed and some non-confirmed. So, for instance, Turkey is sending special ops troops, 1,200 special ops troops to Artsakh. There are, Turkish newspapers are abuzz with news about that, that there may be a Turkish base in Azerbaijan. And I believe I even heard Aliyev flout that idea, or he did not exclude that. So what is Turkey's endgame in this conflict?
I don't think that there is a very clear endgame. As you mentioned, the problem with war is that, especially with this war, is that the information is very limited and it's all speculative as to what's going to happen. I can't help but think about a correlation that might exist between what's happening in Syria now with Turkish troops withdrawing from Idlib and what's happening in Artsakh. Again, I do not have any concrete sort of facts or information, but just by observing, it might be a possibility that this is a quid pro quo kind of a situation where Turkey is limiting its presence in Syria in return of diplomatic and military presence in the South Caucasus. Now, that being said, I have speculated before that Russia will take its sweet time to mediate either directly, militarily, or diplomatically. But I wasn't expecting that it's going to be this long in general. So That's one of the reasons why I see Turkey is refocusing its effort probably after the start of the war, now going back into presence as on the diplomatic table, which is one of the things that Aliyev himself has actually advocated for.
I also think that it's very difficult to understand what Turkey's endgame is just by looking at the South Caucasus. I think Turkey's game is much bigger, and there's a lot of horse trading between the various fronts in which it is engaged, be it Libya, Syria, South Caucasus, or whatever.
This Erdogan visit to the Patriarchate was interesting. I don't know if you followed that. I haven't followed it very closely, but there were, 3 days ago he visited the Patriarch of Istanbul, the Armenian Patriarch of Istanbul. I think the big deficiency in the Armenian position is, of course, the lack of any channel to Erdogan, any channel to Turkish government. That's an effective channel. And if there is any end goal that the Turkish government has identified as far as its involvement in this publicly identified, is to be recognized as the power broker in the South Caucasus, power broker in the Karabakh conflict. Now, of course, the Armenian position is that they're on side of Azerbaijan, they're fighting against us, so we're not gonna negotiate with them. But I'm not sure that's a sound position, considering that obviously Armenia has negotiated with Azerbaijan, even though that's the war. I mean, you negotiate to achieve certain outcomes on the ground. So with the Turkish government and their insistence to participate in the Karabakh negotiations, if that can become connected to the extent of their involvement in the fighting, and if in some ways that the extent of involvement can be mitigated through their engagement, I don't think that should be dismissed out of hand. It should be discussed, and it should probably be discussed directly with the Turkish government.
I agree with Emin, and I have to add one more thing, that it seems that of all the engagements that Turkey has been involved in, be that the Eastern Mediterranean, Libya, and Syria, and to a lesser extent in Iraq, it seems that this is the most favorable quote-unquote outcome and most definitive outcome that Turkey has achieved so far in terms of advances and so on. In Idlib, in Syria, it was frozen. In Libya, it is a back and forth. In Eastern Mediterranean, it's a standoff. But this actually is a major foreign diplomatic and military sort of success for Erdogan to gloat.
I'm sorry, what is the success here?
The success is that the Azerbaijani side, with the active help of, with the active assistance of Turkey, has made some military advancement, and at the same time, Turkey is a de facto and soon to be, my guess, de jure player in the regional sort of dynamic, regional sort of political dynamic.
I am hoping that there is a ceasefire and diplomacy takes over, but haven't we seen temporary successes and setbacks for Turkey and Syria as well?
I mean, it's just a balance sheet, Hovik. I think when you look at it in Syria, basically for the last 2.5 years, Turkey with its proxies, and I'm not just talking about jihadists. I mean, the Syrian Free Army as well, secular sort of army that existed as an opposition to the government forces in Syria. They've been in a standstill. There have been flare-ups and so on, but overall, the balance sheet, if you look at Turkey's involvement in Syria, it has been mixed, tilting more to sort of a balanced, if you want to call it, sort of spreadsheet or a balanced sort of outcome, no win, no lose kind of a situation. But all the indicators, at least from what I've been seeing and what I've been hearing and what I've been reading, is that in the Caucasus, the balance sheet, as of now, Turkish balance sheet, military/diplomatic, is positive from their perspective.
Yeah, particularly since there is no direct Russian response in terms of directly sanctioning Turkey over this. They're just registering their disagreement. After the Russian plane was shut down back in 2015, at least there were trade sanctions. At least there were some kind of negative statements like that. But here you have substantial destruction of an ally's army, and beyond sort of registering the disagreement and sort of pressing for ceasefire, there has not been a direct Russian response. So if there is no direct Russian response to Turkish actions, they will see room there for more actions.
Yeah, they're operating in a vacuum, Emil, right? I mean, they're more or less operating in a vacuum. And don't forget, with the Syrian jet fighter, or the Russian jet fighter that was shot over, within 6, 7 months, they were buddies again. Meetings, yes, there were some sanctions and so on, but within a year or so, there were more agreements signed with Russia. So they tried to hush it in a way. It could have easily escalated.
At least there was some kind of a correction, and sort of later on Russians responded. But it was there's nothing like that right now. I don't see any kind of robust response like that. I mean, there is obviously continued military support for Republic of Armenia and Armenia's ability to defend itself, but that's where it is.
So, Emil, how do you think that Russia is planning to level the field?
I don't know if they're planning to level the field or not. I mean, it's not clear to me that discussions between Yerevan and Moscow are are sufficiently kind of clear, and we've known for many months and years that there is distrust of Nikol Pashinyan from Putin, and probably hate for Nikol Pashinyan for coming to power as he did, and there is not much of a clarity other than the fact that they're not saying that they're not going to get directly involved, and sort of near Kremlin discussions where it comes down to we warned them, and you're going to have this sort of guy, troublemaker, in charge. That's what happens. That's kind of the attitude you hear from just yesterday I was watching this discussion between this pro-Kremlin TV pundit and this journalist that was in Stepanakert for almost a month from Russia Today, and it's clear that their point is that they want somebody else to deal with in Armenia. That's very obvious. Whether they're going to get that or not.
Does it then follow from what you're saying, if, let's say, someone else came in power, one of the former presidents, for instance, would that make any material difference?
I have no guarantee. I don't think anybody has a guarantee of that. But
I can't understand the premise that an entire war would be fought because of some deficiency in the interpersonal relationship between Putin and Pashinyan.
No, it's not. Obviously not. It's not, but the breakdown in relations had occurred prior to the war, and that breakdown in relations was seen in a large part as an opening for Erdogan, for Aliyev to take advantage of it. Whether, in fact, we had still Serge Sargsyan in power and anything would have gone different, I'm not sure. That could have been the same terrible story we're seeing right now, but they will always look for excuses not to intervene, and that's one major excuse for them, is that, first of all, they keep saying that Nikol Pashinyan has not asked for help.
All right, we started off by talking about Turkey, and I think let's watch the situation on the ground. I think it's still too early. My own personal opinion is still too early to say, what the balance sheet is like, but we'll see.
I agree with major part what has been said, but not all. So I would like to add some points to the discussion on Russia's and Turkish role. In my opinion, Turkey is seeking not for the role in Karabakh itself, but more for the role in Azerbaijan. So, in any case, if Azerbaijan wins, or if Azerbaijan loses, Turkey's role in Azerbaijan has strengthened already. And this is, I think, one of the factors which Erdogan takes into account. And in this way, he is winner. From other point of view, I don't think Erdogan has a lot of potential to get involved in negotiations, because all other parties except to Azerbaijan, but all three Minsk Group co-chairs and Armenia will be against. So I don't see any possibility for Erdogan to get there. And we have seen the first temporary ceasefire agreement, where it was written that format of negotiations does not change, and this is the framework in which it will go on afterwards. So we should not expect the things to finish quickly, because I can remember that in 1992 the negotiations have started from January, and the war has started. Big clashes have started since the May. So here we will have these negotiations for a long time until the situation on the battleground will change. And concerning Russia, I think Russia's role in this conflict is not the same as in case of Syria, because here Russia tries to stay mediator, and now it even tries to become the only mediator, which will also not work. But anyway, I think Russia will play its game, and Russia will try to compensate Turkish involvement, but it will not be verbal. I mean, if we look at what Erdogan does, he does a lot of verbal interventions. Of course, not only that, there is a lot of Turkish participation on the ground, but verbal intervention is very obvious. While Russian verbal intervention is almost absent. But on the ground, Russia's influence will still be significant. So I think it's just that Russia is different in its foreign policy and its public policy than Turkey. It's different political culture. So we should take into account that as well.
Oh, yeah, but you started to reference some of the early 90s events. I think people need to realize that the magnitude of Armenian setback so far is the only comparable to Azerbaijani setback in the summer of 1993, when basically within 1 month they lost that entire southern area south of Karabakh, right? Between basically through August and a little bit of beginning of September. This is the reverse for us. I mean, the collapse of the southern front, has been incredibly fast, and so far I have not seen. There was an attempt to counterattack back on October 7th, but obviously it failed, and since then the collapse only increased, and the degree to which Azerbaijani forces have come into proper Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh, Hadrut and Martuni districts is unprecedented. That didn't even happen during 92, 94 fighting. So that's something to keep in mind. This is a big setback.
I don't know, should I be saying that, but we have lost about 21.6% of Artsakh territory, which was controlled as of September 26. And yes, it is comparable to what Azerbaijan lost in 1993, or it's on the other side, it's comparable to what Armenians have lost in 1992 summer. But the difference is that in 1993 for Azerbaijan, game was over, as we know by the results, at least for the next 27 years. As of Nagorno-Karabakh, now the game is not over. True, on October 7, the counterattack has failed because of massive use of UAVs and rocket artillery, but who knows, maybe in some time Armenia will be able to regroup to aid Artsakh, and maybe something will change on the ground.
That is granted that there won't be any peace agreement anytime soon, or a ceasefire agreement. If within a month or so there won't be anything, and winter would set in, that would give the Armenian side an advantage. And this could easily become a repetition of a long-term, long-haul fight, where in the winters the Armenian side would be able to reclaim land and go on the counteroffensive, and then in the spring the Azeris would go back. All this depends whether or not there will be a ceasefire that is maintained and applied within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and the big issue is ability to bring in reserves, and certainly the reserve base overall is larger for Azerbaijan. Plus, it's augmented by Turkish forces, be that mercenaries that have been registered there, or possibly regular forces, and obviously the Air Force, and the advantage that they have is substantial. So especially when it comes to offensive operations, but Armenia needs to find ways, maybe non-traditional ways of increasing its resource base and ability to bring in more resources into the battle.
This highlights why, as Putin was saying at the Valdai discussion, that there needs to be a non-military resolution to which both sides agree. Otherwise, we're going to have years of back and forth war while people die on both sides. Just because agreement is taking a long time doesn't mean that the sides should start shooting.
Speaking of long-term, or considering this to be protracted conflict, I wanted to talk a little bit about the economic consequences and strategy that Armenia should take. So, obviously the war has been going on for about a month now. And, I wanted to ask Hrant what your advice would be to Armenia's economic planners today, and how do we plan for something when you don't know if it may last another month, or it may last, or maybe or if it may be a protracted war that goes on for multiple years, like in the early 1990s. And even if the war stops today, I think Armenia needs to spend a lot of money on defense expenditures in order to replenish its supplies. So, any ideas for us there?
It's a very hard question, to be frank, because if we combine all losses, economic losses and the human capital losses and some other losses which we have so far, those are already great. So on one side, I don't think that it will be as long as the first war, because the human losses in this war are much, much bigger, uncomparably bigger. And the second thing is but on the other side, the foreign political context in which Turkey and Azerbaijan took an advance, as it was very rightfully said, it's a strategic vacuum, which is also caused by the COVID and other issues. So now everyone is regrouping. So foreign political pressure is not big enough to stop Azerbaijan. So going back to the economy, my biggest advice would be to not spend much on keeping the currency rate, because we see, for example, the Turkish lira depreciating, and we cannot exclude that Armenian dram will depreciate as well, although it does not yet, just by maybe 2% as of now, maybe 2 or 3%, but still not much. But I would not spend foreign exchange reserves on that, and I would keep them, because Armenia will have a lot of things, a lot of expenses, and that reserves will be extremely needed.
Hrant, when it comes to currency devaluation, to what extent that is a sure deal that a country dealing with war and conflict, its currency will be devaluated? I mean, I remember in the case of Lebanon back in the 70s, the currency remained stable up until for about 10 years after the fighting. It only started devaluating for whatever reasons, only after 10 years of fighting. So what are the chances of that happening if it's left alone without spending its currency reserves?
Well, so far it's dependent on the balance of payments. So since Armenia has exports declined but imports declined as well, the ratio did not change much. That's why the financial and monetary factors which contribute to the currency rate did not change much as well. Although we don't know exactly, because the statistics of foreign reserves and some other data is published 1 or 2 months later. But as of now, the fundamentals did not change that much, that Armenia will have to devaluate. But anyway, if that is the case, I would not spend reserves at all on that.
And is there any factor or correlation between, for instance, the aid that is flowing into Armenia, not a big amount, but still sizable amount, couple of $100 million in one way or another, let's say? Does that have any factor in terms of keeping the sort of the economy and the currency sort of afloat or static?
Well, it certainly contributes. We should take into account that about half of the money was collected in Armenia itself, but the rest, of course, contributes to the stability. But also, I don't know yet on what the government is planning to spend this money, because they did not have any publications on that. Maybe they are already spending it. Maybe they did not start spending it yet, because it's right, we don't know how long it will take and how much money will be needed. For example, we have already refugees from Artsakh, temporary refugees, about 90,000, as foreign minister said. So government pays some expenses on them. So it's already needed big amounts of money even on that.
Hrant, I have a similar question here. Are you talking about the remittances from Armenians who are working in different countries, or are you talking about funds like the Armenia Fund?
No, I'm talking about funds like All Armenian Fund or 1,000 plus. This.
Because I was thinking about all the funds rolling up into the Armenia Fund. You know how they've reportedly collected over $120 million, and hopefully that's only a start. We're used to thinking about these funds going towards charitable, humanitarian, or infrastructure projects, but what about shoring up the financial sector and supporting the monetary policy and health of the economy?
Well, that would be good, of course, but that's very big expense. So I think if we're talking about the priorities, top priority would be aiding refugees, then weaponry, then some infrastructure repairment, and if something is left, then of course.
Hrant, do you have a ballpark estimate on what the total bill of the war so far, assuming it will stop soon, would be to Armenia?
I have a very crude estimate on what Armenia and Artsakh have lost so far, including human capital. And human capital, I mean the expenses on human capital. And it's about $5 billion, and about $30 billion it's Azerbaijani expense. So that's very crude estimate. I will have a time to do that properly in maybe half a year when there will be more data, but so far it's...
Hrant, when you say human capital, I assume you are including the potential earnings of, for example, young soldiers who would have had careers.
For sure. Yeah, of course.
And lost productivity as well, Hrant?
Of course.
And what about the infrastructure? Granted that Armenia proper hasn't been witnessing as of yet major damages on infrastructure, but assuming that there are many assumptions here, but assuming that Gharapa would one way or another be within the Armenian budget in terms of repairs and so on and so forth, do you think that infrastructure repair and upgrading of infrastructure could be a boost in the economy, could play a role in the economic activity?
To be frank, I don't think so. I would say that, first of all, we have a long-term loss in construction and in property market in Armenia proper. And I think the prices of property will decline. Of course, in Artsakh itself, there will be growth of construction because there will be a lot of spendings on that. Of course, in the frame of possibility. But it also depends when they will be stop shooting, because the actual fight might stop at some point, but shooting might not stop. And that will also prolong the situation when people don't live in their homes. And also the amount of, Armenia itself did not suffer much, or almost did not suffer, infrastructurally, but in Artsakh, according to Artak Beglaryan, there are 10,500 buildings partially or completely destroyed. So it's already a big amount, and it's growing like 500 or more daily. So it's hard to imagine how Armenia will be able to reconstruct that, given that Armenia still suffers from COVID crisis, and also given that Armenia took long time for Armenia to recover from Spitak earthquake and from similar events.
Maybe we can spend a few minutes on COVID, Hrant, and then we can close. What is the latest on COVID? I think in the past 2 weeks, we've seen a steep rise in the daily numbers. And, we've seen, for instance, new infections in the 2 to 2,500 range. Tests have picked up as well, but, we're testing now around 4 to 5,000 a day, but the positivity rate is around 40 to 50%, which is huge in my opinion. So, what's your take on the on the rise of COVID. And are you seeing, like, for instance, one thing I don't know is, are you seeing a lot of what we saw back in earlier in the year when the hospitals were full? And I haven't seen news like that. So is there still like a statistical glitch, or what's going on?
Well, yeah, you've correctly quoted the numbers, and I have my reconstruction model, the whole epidemics reconstruction model, and there have been several data that helped me to calibrate it a bit, and it proved to be exact. So far, we have, in my estimate, about 120,000 active infected people right now, of whom 25,000 are registered. Some of them are in incubation period, about 39,000. Some of them are asymptomatic. Some of them have symptoms, and so many of them were registered. So the problem is that Armenia had overflowed hospitals back when the figures were 10,000 active infected registered. Now we have 25,000. Yes, we don't have such news, but I'm sure that the problem is there, because there are 2.5 thousand hospital beds which were available for COVID, and I think since some part of these beds are used for the people who got injured during the war, I think the capacity has even decreased. So I think Armenia has big trouble there, and as far as I know, there is a trouble in Artsakh itself as well. I will not detailize it, but you can imagine. And well, when I look at this, I remember what I've been reading in history. Thanks to God, it's not cholera; it's just COVID.
And Hrant, when it comes to the increased number of cases, I think if I've been following this closely as well, without looking at the numbers, rather the policies. There has been a surge in the numbers, but then as recently as last week, the government has been imposing the COVID-19 distancing and the mask and so on and so forth. So after witnessing this rise, the surge, do you expect that there would be a decline in the number of cases in the next 10 days or so, because of the delay, obviously, in terms of implementing a policy and the delay in the return?
No, I don't think there will be a decline, because what we could observe already is that COVID has seasonality, and big part of the reason why it declined in the summer, it was that it was summer. Now, one of the reasons for the skyrocketing of the numbers was reopening of the schools on September 15. Another was the beginning of the war in the September 27, after which no one took care. And I'm not talking only about government, it's also about people. And but also it's the weather. So
in a way, you're talking about the second wave, right?
Yeah, of course. So since the weather is getting colder and colder every day, government might be able to decrease the growth rate, but it will not decline in any way. It will continue growing, maybe at a bit lower speed. Now we have about 1.8 reproduction index. Maybe it will decline to 1.5 or 1.4, but it will still climb up very quickly. On the other hand, we might not be even able to register all of it, because now Armenia is using its testing capacity fully, and that's why the test positivity rate is growing every day. So I think we might not be able to register it more, but it will continue increasing.
Well, I think that this was an interesting discussion, though not a very uplifting one. So I want to thank everyone for joining today, and talk to you next week.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ovi.
Thank you.
And that concludes our program for this episode of Groong Week in Review. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from this previous week. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org, that's Groong, and on our Facebook page. ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm 𝐀𝐬𝐿 Manacharyan, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.